Hello, I'm Randy Padfield, the director at the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, and I'm also a member of Pennsylvania Task Force 1, one of the 28 federal urban search and rescue teams in the United States, and had the opportunity to respond to the events of September 11th at the World Trade Center in New York City. Just about anyone who was or has memories of the morning of September 11th 20 years ago, they will probably be able to tell you exactly what they were doing and where they were at when they heard of those events or first heard of those events. For me, I was on my way to work a little late that morning because I had worked late the evening before. I was at a post office mailing some letters and had a phone call from a friend of mine who was due to depart Harrisburg International Airport, and for some reason the plane was being held on the runway and wasn't being allowed to depart. She knew something significant was occurring but did not know what that was. And I turned on the radio in my vehicle at the time to find out that a plane had struck at least one of the towers of the World Trade Center. Fast forward through the events of that day, which were trying to understand the situation and the chaos, and that evening found myself on a bus with a little over 60 members of PA Task Force 1 being deployed to the World Trade Center collapse site in Lower Manhattan. Some of the memories of that response, probably the first one was as the bus came up and moved its way through traffic, seeing for the first time the skyline of New York City and Lower Manhattan devoid of the World Trade Center towers, and seeing smoke and dust billowing up from southern Manhattan. Took me back to when I was a young boy and visited the World Trade Center's towers and trying to understand how two 110-story buildings could collapse. I also thought about, all of our teammates that had practiced and trained so hard since the early to mid-90s as part of the team, and hoping that our training actually prepared us for what we were about to see. Eventually that evening we got into the Javits Center, which was going to be our base of operations, offloaded our equipment and set up our main base of operations. We tried to get some sleep that night, but no one on the team actually slept. We knew that we had a very narrow window to be able to effect rescues. In collapsed buildings, the first 24 hours is critical. After that, there's a significant decrease in the ability to be able to find people alive. Early in the morning of September 12th, I deployed as a rescue specialist on Rescue Squad 1. We'd split our team to work a night shift and a day shift, and I was assigned to the day shift. And I remember showing up at the site and just it being surreal, the amount of devastation, the amount of activity, the amount of dust and debris. We went into operation, and for the time that we were on the site, we worked long hours beside New York City firefighters, police officers, and other first responders to look for people that may still have been alive. Within the first 3 or 4 operational periods, it was very evident to us that it was going to be hard for anyone to be able to survive such a catastrophic incident. About the 3rd or 4th day, nobody could sleep. We knew what was going on in New York, but we did not know what was going on. So many times when we came off of our shift, we went back to try to update our information, huddle around a TV to be able to watch what was occurring in Shanksville and what was occurring at the Pentagon in Washington. And late that night, I walked around the Javits Center. Since many of the first responders were housed at the Javits Center, many of the folks that had loved ones posted messages around the Javits Center that had descriptions of their loved ones in hopes that we would see them and be able to reunite them. And that night, I walked around the Javits Center and read just about every description that was posted. And at that point in time, the sorrow was almost overwhelming and extremely saddening, because knowing what we were seeing at the site and what we were digging through, and then taking a look at these, very well-crafted descriptions and these that were made by loved ones in hopes that we would find, their loved one in the rubble, and they contained descriptions of their personalities, their hair color, their eye color, jewelry, tattoos, anything else that they could hold on to in hopes that we would find their loved one. Unfortunately, we would work that site and never recover somebody alive out of the site. But we knew that recovering human remains was really critical for families to start the closure. Many of us came back. We actually, talked to civics groups afterwards and other groups that were interested in what occurred to try to understand that. And that was very cathartic for a lot of the responders. And I always left them with a couple of messages. One message was that, we need to understand, how this occurred and why it occurred so that the people that lost their lives that day did not die in vain, and that we could prevent and disrupt any future attacks on our soil. And then number two was really that, think about the heroic acts that occurred that day. Think about the solidarity that we had as a nation starting on September 12th and how united we happened to be. And those heroic acts were not just first responders, but they were everyday citizens that stood up that day, including, the individuals on Flight 93 that thwarted kind of the final leg of that terrorist attack and took action on their own to be able to protect the lives of individuals that were potentially going to be taken by the terrorists. And also leave them with a message that, first responders have a lot of similar DNA in their system, and that we saw a lot of heroic acts by the New York City Fire Department, law enforcement and their police department, Port Authority workers, everybody else, the day of September 11th and the days that followed. But that, first responders, while we're small in numbers, even in their own communities, if they had 210-story buildings that terrorists tried to take down by flying planes into them, their first responders in their own communities would be doing the exact same thing. And I think it's critical for people to understand that.